I was 67 years old when my husband kicked me out of the house because of a woman 30 years younger. After 40 years of marriage, he simply brought his mistress into my house and said that I had to leave. No one cared where I was going to sleep that night. I found myself alone, with nowhere to go, feeling like everything I'd built was worth nothing. He thought I was just a disposable old woman who could be replaced by a newer version. But what he didn't know is that all those years I was preparing for exactly this day. And when he found out what I'd been keeping secret, the look on his face was priceless. My name is Dorothy, and this is the story of how I proved that you should never underestimate a 67-year-old woman. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know who's following Dorothy's story. Now, let's get to what happened. My name is Linda. I'm 67 years old, and I never thought I'd be here telling this story. But you know how it is. We need to get things off our chest, right? We need to talk about what happened, even if it's to a bunch of strangers on the internet. So here it goes. I was married to Kenneth for 40 years. 40 years, folks. We met when I was 27 and he was 29. He worked at an accounting firm, and I was a secretary at a medical office. We got married after 2 years of dating, back in the days when everyone still believed marriage was forever. We built a life together, a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with trees lining the sidewalks and neighbors who greet each other. I always took care of the house, worked part-time for years, and when I retired at 62, I could finally enjoy that slower pace we dream about our whole lives. Kenneth kept working until he was 65, then he retired too. I thought we were going to enjoy those years together, travel a little, visit places we'd never been, spend time with the grandchildren when they came along. But life had other plans. Things started to change about 6 months before that day. Kenneth started acting different. At first, it was small stuff I didn't really think much of. He started dressing better, bought some new shirts, started wearing a different cologne. I even found it a little strange, but I thought, well, the man's taking care of himself, good for him. He'd put on a few pounds after retiring, spent all day on the couch watching TV. So when he said he was going back to the gym, I actually encouraged him. But then things started getting weird. He began going out more, always with ready-made excuses. I'm meeting some people from work. I'm going to play dominoes with Jerry. I need to take care of some stuff at the bank. I believed him, of course. We'd been together for 40 years. Why would I doubt him? But there was one thing that bothered me: his phone. Kenneth was never big on his phone, but suddenly it became an extension of his hand. He took it to the bathroom, left it face down on the table, and when it rang, he'd jump up and go answer it in another room. One time I asked who it was, and he said it was the bank, but I saw the name Brit flash on the screen before he picked up. One day, this was in March last year, I was making lunch and heard him laughing in the bedroom. It wasn't a normal laugh, It was that laugh you use when you're talking to someone special, that tone I knew well because he used to use it with me many years ago. My heart tightened. I stood there in the kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, listening to him speak softly, and felt something bad in my stomach, but I didn't want to believe it. I pushed that thought far away and kept stirring the food, even though I couldn't smell anything. That night, Kenneth said he was going out, that people from his old job were having a happy hour. He left smelling good, wearing a new shirt, and I stayed home alone watching TV until almost midnight. When he got back, he barely acknowledged me, went straight to the shower, and went to bed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something had changed, but without the courage to ask what. Weeks went by, and Kenneth grew more and more distant. He barely talked to me, barely looked at me. When I tried to start a conversation, he'd answer with one-word replies or change the channel on the TV. We used to have dinner together every day, but now we ate in silence, each of us staring at our own plate. I tried to remember the last time we'd laughed together about something, and I couldn't. I started to feel invisible in my own house. I'd wake up, make coffee, tidy everything up, and he wouldn't even say thank you. I washed, ironed, cooked, and it was like I was just a piece of furniture. One time, I fixed my hair differently, put on a nice outfit, and when he got home, he walked right past me without even looking. I felt so small, so useless. I started wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I'd gained too much weight, if I wasn't interesting anymore. I began looking at myself in the mirror and seeing an old, tired, boring woman. And the worst part was that Kenneth seemed to agree without needing to say a word. Then came that Saturday in May. I'll never forget it. It was a beautiful, sunny day, the kind you want to enjoy. I'd baked a chocolate cake that Kenneth loved and was thinking about asking him to sit with me in the backyard, have some coffee, talk. I wanted so badly to get my husband back, you know? I wanted us to go back to what we were. But when I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, I saw him holding 2 suitcases, 2 big suitcases, the kind you travel with. My heart started racing. Kenneth, what's going on? Are we going on a trip? I asked, trying to smile, trying to understand. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, distant, like I was a stranger. No, Linda, he said. I'm not going on a trip. I'm bringing someone to live here. I stood there, not understanding. What do you mean, bringing someone? He sighed, impatient, like I was stupid. I'm with someone else. She's going to live here, and you're going to have to leave. Folks, I swear in that moment I thought I'd heard wrong. I let out a nervous laugh, the kind you laugh when you think someone's messing with you. Kenneth, stop with this bad joke. But he wasn't joking. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, It's not a joke, Linda. I don't love you anymore. You're useless now. I found someone better, younger, prettier, and she's going to live here, so you need to pack your things and leave. I felt my legs go weak. I grabbed the table so I wouldn't fall. Kenneth, this house is mine too. We built this together. He shrugged. Whatever. I want you out. Today. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 40 years. 40 years of my life dedicated to that man, that house, that marriage. And he was just kicking me out like I was trash. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, feeling the tears start to fall. He didn't answer. He just grabbed the suitcases and walked out the door. I stood there in the middle of the living room, listening to his car drive away. I looked around at that house I'd taken care of for 40 years, every detail chosen by me, every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, and suddenly it all felt like it wasn't mine anymore. I felt like the loneliest woman in the world. I sat down on the couch and cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I cried for the humiliation, for the pain, for the feeling of being discarded once I got old. I felt useless, ugly, worthless. Like 40 years of my life meant nothing. I don't know how long I sat on that couch crying. It must have been about 2 hours, maybe 3. I'd look at the clock on the wall, watch the hands moving, but it was like time didn't make any sense. I tried to process what had just happened. Kenneth had kicked me out. After 40 years, he simply decided I was no longer good enough and tossed me aside. I kept thinking about everything I might have done wrong, about how I could have let this happen. Had I gained too much weight? Was I not attractive anymore? Had I been a bad wife? My head wouldn't stop spinning with those questions, and each one made me feel smaller, more useless. I got up, washed my face, tried to pull myself together. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a broken woman, swollen eyes, a worn face, messy hair. I tried to fix myself up a little, run a comb through my hair, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold anything. I went back to the living room and started pacing back and forth, not knowing what to do. Should I call someone? But who? I didn't have family nearby. My parents had already passed away and I was an only child. My friends, most of them were people we knew together, couples we used to go out with. How was I supposed to call them and say, "Hey, Kenneth kicked me out because he got himself a mistress"? The shame was too much. I felt completely alone, with nowhere to run, with no one to help me. That's when I heard the sound of a car in the garage. My heart started racing. He was back. I went to the window and saw Kenneth getting out of the car, and from the passenger side, she stepped out. The mistress. Folks, when I saw that woman, it felt like a punch to the gut. She was young, very young. She had to be around 35, 37 at most. Slim, tall, with the kind of body of someone who goes to the gym every day. Long, straight hair, tight clothes, high heels. She was everything I wasn't anymore. Young, beautiful, full of life. And the way Kenneth looked at her, it was the way he used to look at me 40 years ago. With that sparkle in his eyes, that silly smile. I felt such a sharp pain in my chest that I had to sit down. It was like someone had stabbed me and twisted the knife. They walked in through the front door like it was nothing. Kenneth didn't even look at me. He went straight to the bedroom with her suitcases, and she looked me up and down with a look of disgust, like I was some kind of animal. She didn't say hi, didn't say a word, just gave me that look and followed him. I stood there in the living room, frozen, hearing them talk in the bedroom, hearing her laugh, hearing him speak softly to her. I felt invaded in my own home. That bedroom was mine. That bed was mine. That house was mine. And suddenly, I was the intruder. After a few minutes, Kenneth came back into the living room. He looked at me with that cold expression again and said, "Linda, I already told you, you need to leave. Pack your things and go." I felt the anger rise. For the first time that day, I felt angry. "Kenneth, you can't do this. This house is mine too. I have a right to be here." He laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Right, you think you have rights. Linda, look at you. You're old. You don't do anything. You're good for nothing. I supported this house for years. I paid for everything. This house is mine." Every word was like a stab. I tried to argue, tried to say we'd built all of this together, but he wouldn't even listen. "I'm not going to argue with you. Either you leave peacefully, or I'll call the police and say you're trespassing on my property." That's when she showed up. The mistress, she came into the living room with the look of someone who just won the lottery. She hooked her arm through Kenneth's, leaned against him, and looked at me with a little smirk. "You're still here," she said, in a thin, irritating voice. "Kenneth told me you'd already be gone." I looked at her, then at Kenneth, and couldn't believe it. He did nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't say a word. He just stood there, letting that woman talk to me like that. "I've lived here for 40 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not leaving just like that, out of nowhere, just because you want me to." She rolled her eyes. "Sweetie, this is my house now, and I don't want you here, so do everyone a favor and disappear." I looked at Kenneth, waiting for him to say something, to put that woman in her place, but he didn't say a thing. He just stood there, looking at me with that empty expression, like I really was nothing. And that's when I understood that the Kenneth I knew, the man I had married, no longer existed. The man standing in front of me was a stranger who had decided to throw me away like I was old trash. "Fine," I said, feeling the tears come back. "I'll leave, but I need time to pack my things. Kenneth sighed, impatient. You have until tomorrow morning. Pack what you need and get out. I couldn't believe it. One day, he was giving me one day to leave the house I'd lived in for 40 years. Kenneth, this is inhumane. I need more time. He shook his head. No, tomorrow morning. And you can only take your clothes and personal items, furniture, appliances. Everything stays. I felt my throat tighten. But, Kenneth, I bought most of those things with my own money. He shrugged. I don't give a damn. It all stays here. You'll leave with just the clothes on your back if you keep pushing me. I went up to the guest bedroom. I wasn't going to sleep in my bedroom, not with them there. I stayed awake all night, sitting on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart in a matter of hours. I could hear the two of them in the next room. I heard her laughing, heard Kenneth whispering, heard other things I don't even want to describe, and every sound was torture. I put the pillow over my head to block it out, but it didn't help. I cried all night long, silently, biting the sheet so I wouldn't make a sound. I felt humiliated, destroyed, completely worthless. Early in the morning, I got up, washed my face, and started packing my things. I took some clothes, a few pairs of shoes, some personal items with sentimental value. I looked at every single thing in that house and remembered when we'd bought it. Happy moments we'd lived there. But now, all of it felt like a lie. Kenneth came downstairs for breakfast and didn't even say hello. She came down right after, wearing a robe, like she owned the place. She poured herself some coffee, sat in my chair, at my kitchen table, and scrolled on her phone like I didn't exist. I finished packing, grabbed 2 suitcases, and went downstairs. Kenneth was in the living room. Leaving already? He asked, barely looking at me. I said, my voice shaking. I don't have a choice, do I? He didn't answer. I looked at him one last time, hoping to see some regret, some emotion. But there was nothing, just emptiness. I walked out the door with my 2 suitcases. It was almost 8 on a Sunday morning. The neighbors were heading out to jog to walk their dogs. I passed by them with my head down, trying to hide my face, dying of shame. I didn't know where to go. I had no one. I stood there on the sidewalk, looking back at that house that had been my whole life, and felt like I'd lost everything. But what Kenneth didn't know, what no one knew, was that all those years I'd been preparing for this. I had kept a secret. And when he found out, the look on his face would be priceless. I took a cab and asked the driver to take me to a hotel downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was clean and cheap. I didn't have many options. At least it was a place where I could breathe, where I could think about what to do. The driver tried to make small talk, asked if I was on vacation, but I just answered with one-word replies. I didn't have the headspace to talk to anyone. When we got there, I paid, grabbed my suitcases, and went inside. The front desk clerk looked at me with that expression of someone who's used to seeing people in rough situations. She didn't ask anything, just handed me the room key and pointed me down the hallway. The room was small, with a double bed, an old TV hanging on the wall, and a tiny bathroom. I sat down on the bed and looked around. That was it. After 40 years of marriage, a comfortable house, a life I thought was stable, there I was, in a cheap hotel room, not knowing what to do. I felt a tightness in my chest, but this time I didn't cry. I didn't have any tears left. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, and closed my eyes. But I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept thinking about Kenneth, that woman, the humiliation I'd gone through. I felt old, ugly, disposable, like I didn't have any value left. But you know what's funny? In the middle of all that pain, all that sadness, I started to feel something different. Anger. An anger that slowly grew, like a fire that starts small and spreads. I started thinking, who did Kenneth think he was to treat me that way? Who did he think he was to just throw me away like trash? I had given 40 years of my life to that man. I had taken care of him, the house, everything. And he just decided I was no longer good enough. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't the foolish, naive woman he thought I was. I'd seen the signs for months, and I had prepared myself. Let me explain something. About 8 months earlier, when Kenneth started acting strange, I began to suspect something. At first, I tried to ignore it, tried to believe it was all in my head, but things kept becoming more and more obvious. The constant outings, the hidden phone, the lack of interest in me. I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong. So I started paying attention. I started observing. And one thing I learned in those 40 years of marriage is that a man who's hiding something always leaves a trail. One night, this was in January, Kenneth went out for what he called a dinner with friends. I stayed home, and since I couldn't sleep because my mind wouldn't settle down, I decided to organize some papers. We had a home office, a small room where Kenneth kept documents, bills, that kind of stuff. I started sorting through some old papers and ended up opening a drawer I never touched, because that's where he kept his work things. And that's when I found it. Bank statements from an account I didn't recognize. An account in his name only that I didn't even know existed. I sat down in the chair and started looking at those statements more closely, and what I saw made me go cold. Kenneth had been taking money out of our joint account, little by little, for months, and depositing it into that secret account. It wasn't a small amount, either. It was a lot of money. Almost $80,000. $80,000 he'd siphoned off without me knowing. I felt a mix of shock and anger. How had he done that? How had I not noticed? But then I remembered that Kenneth had always handled the household finances. He paid the bills, worked on the computer, and I trusted him. I never questioned it. And he had used that trust to steal from me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up thinking about what to do. I could confront him, but what good would that do? He'd deny it, make up some excuse, turn things around on me. So I decided to do things differently. I decided to protect myself. I took photos of all those statements with my phone, every page, every document. I saved everything in an online folder that only I had access to. And I started digging deeper. I started paying attention to everything. Every time he went out, I noted the time, the place. Every time he lied, I stored it in my memory. I became a detective inside my own home. And that's when I found out about Brittany. That was her name, Brittany. I found out because one day his phone rang while he was in the shower. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And there it was. Messages, photos, everything. She sent him half-naked photos. He sent messages saying he thought I was old and ugly, that he couldn't stand being with me anymore. I read all of it feeling my heart break little by little, but at the same time, I knew that was evidence, so I took photos of everything. The messages, the photos she sent, all of it. I saved everything in the same secret folder, but I didn't stop there. I went deeper. I started researching divorce, rights, assets. I learned that in cases of adultery, the division of assets could be different. I learned that secret accounts could be traced. I learned that I had rights to a lot of things Kenneth thought were his alone. And that's when I made the most important decision of my life. I hired a lawyer. It was in February. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Sharon, someone an acquaintance had recommended. I didn't tell anyone. I left the house saying I was going shopping and went straight to her office. Sharon was a black woman, younger than me, about 45, very sharp and straightforward. I told her everything, showed her the photos of the statements, the messages, all of it. She stayed quiet for a few minutes, analyzing everything, and then looked at me with a small smile. "Linda," she said, "you have a very strong case. Your husband made 2 serious mistakes, adultery and hiding assets. If you want, we can take him to court, and you'll come out of this with much more than you imagine." I hired her on the spot, and over the following months, we prepared everything. Sharon told me not to confront Kenneth, to keep acting normal, because we needed more evidence. So that's what I did. I kept being the perfect wife. I cooked, cleaned, pretended I didn't know anything. But inside, I was preparing the counterattack. Sharon went to court and managed to trace everything Kenneth had, the secret account, investments I didn't even know existed, a savings account he'd hidden. And we discovered that that house he swore was only his, was in both our names. I was entitled to 50% of everything. Now, lying on that hotel bed, I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone. I called Sharon. "Sharon," I said when she answered, "it happened. He kicked me out of the house and brought the mistress to live there." I heard her sigh on the other end of the line. "Okay, Linda, that's exactly what we were waiting for. This is abandonment of the marital home and more evidence of adultery. Now we can act. Are you safe?" I told her yes, that I was at a hotel. "Perfect," she said. "Tomorrow morning I'll file everything in court. He won't know what hit him." I hung up the phone and, for the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. Kenneth thought he'd destroyed me. He thought I was a useless old woman who would just disappear. But he had no idea about the hurricane that was coming. And when he found out, it would be far too late. On Monday morning, I woke up early. Not that I'd slept much, because the night had been torture. I kept waking up every hour, with nightmares, with that awful feeling in my chest. But that morning, when I opened my eyes and remembered what was going to happen, I felt a different kind of energy. It was like I'd woken up from a nightmare and could finally fight back. I took a shower, got myself together, and went downstairs to have breakfast at the hotel restaurant. I wasn't hungry, but I forced myself to eat something. Sharon had called me at 7 in the morning, saying she was already on her way to the courthouse with all the paperwork. She was going to file the divorce, the emergency order so I could go back home, and the complaint for hiding assets, all at once. I sat there in the restaurant, stirring my coffee with a spoon, checking my phone every 2 minutes, waiting for news. At 9:30, Sharon called me. "Done," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I went in with everything. The process server is going to his house this afternoon to deliver the notice. He's about to get the shock of his life. I felt such a huge wave of relief that I had to grip the table. "And now," I asked, "now we wait. He has 15 days to respond. But with the evidence we have, Linda, he doesn't stand a chance. The house is yours by right. The money he hid will have to be split. And with the affair proven, you're going to walk away with most of everything. So breathe. You're going to be okay." I spent the rest of the morning in my hotel room, watching TV without really watching, staring at my phone, waiting. I knew any minute Kenneth would get served, and I wanted to see his reaction. Not like I'd see it in person, but I could picture it. I pictured his face when the process server rang the doorbell, when he opened that envelope and read that I was taking him to court. I pictured the panic, the rage, the shock. And it gave me a satisfaction I didn't even know I was capable of feeling. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Hello?" On the other end, I heard Kenneth's voice. But it wasn't that cold, distant voice from 2 days ago. It was sharp, frantic, almost yelling. "Linda, what did you do?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and replied in the firmest voice I could manage. "I did what I should have done a long time ago, Kenneth. I protected myself." He blew up. "You sued me. You took me to court. Are you out of your mind?" I wanted to laugh, but I held it in. "I'm not out of my mind, Kenneth. I'm just going after what's mine. You thought you could kick me out of the house, move your mistress in, and I'd just sit there and take it." He went silent for a few seconds, and I could hear his heavy breathing. "Linda, you don't understand. That house is mine. The money is mine. I worked for all of it." I laughed. This time I really laughed. "Kenneth, that house is in both our names. And the money you hid? I know everything. I've got proof of everything. You're not getting out of this looking good." He tried to switch tactics. He got calmer, more controlled, like he'd realized screaming wasn't going to fix anything. "Linda, look, we can handle this another way. We don't need lawyers, court, all that. We can sit down and talk like adults." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Kenneth, we can't. You had your chance to treat me with respect, and you chose to humiliate me. You kicked me out of my own house, moved another woman in, treated me like trash. Now you're going to deal with the consequences." He exploded again. "You're going to regret this, Linda. You'll see." And he hung up in my face. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding, but it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my life. I wasn't that passive woman anymore, the one who swallowed everything in silence. I was fighting back, and I was going to win. The next day, Sharon called me again. "Linda, you're not going to believe this. He already called the office. He wants to negotiate." I wasn't surprised. "And what did he offer?" Sharon laughed. "Nothing decent. He wants to give you 20% of the house and a little money so you can go away quietly. I told him he's out of his mind if he thinks you're taking that." I smiled. "And what did you say?" "I said we're going to demand 60% of everything, including the house, the hidden money, and damages for emotional distress. And if he won't agree, we go to trial and put it all out there. The cheating, the secret account, the messages with the mistress, everything." I felt so proud of Sharon. She was fighting for me like no one ever had. Days went by, and things kept heating up. Kenneth tried calling me about 3 more times, always bouncing between threats and attempts to work something out. In one call, he said he was going to prove I was a terrible wife, that I didn't do anything at home, that he kept me. I laughed right in his face. "Kenneth, I worked for 30 years. I took care of the house, you, everything. And you know damn well half of everything we have is mine by right. So stop making a fool of yourself and just accept it." He hung up again, furious. A week after he was served, Sharon got a temporary order. The judge ruled that I could move back into the house and that Kenneth had to leave temporarily until the divorce was finalized. When Sharon told me, I cried, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was relief, justice, victory. "And Brittany?" I asked. Sharon laughed. "She has to leave too. The house is yours, Linda. You can go back." The next day, I went back. I took a taxi and told him to drive me home. When we got there, I saw Kenneth's car in the driveway. But I wasn't afraid. I had the court order in my hand. I had my rights. I unlocked the door with my key and walked in. Kenneth was in the living room, sitting on the couch, looking furious. Brittany was next to him, arms crossed, glaring at me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, in that irritating voice. I looked at her and smiled. "I live here, and you two have to leave." Kenneth stood up, grabbed a paper off the table, and waved it at me. "You think you won?" You think this is how it's going to be? I shrugged. Kenneth, the judge already decided. You've got 24 hours to get out. If you don't, I'm calling the police. Brittany looked at Kenneth, panicking. But Kenneth, you said the house was yours. You said she didn't have rights to anything. Kenneth didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me with hate. But I didn't back down. I stared right back and said, You've got 24 hours. I went up to the guest room and stayed there until they left. It took about 3 hours, but they left. I heard the door slam, heard the car pull away, and then I came downstairs. I looked around at that house, my house again. They'd left everything a mess. Clothes tossed around, dirty dishes in the sink, the bed unmade. I took a deep breath and started cleaning. I cleaned every room, washed every dish, changed the sheets. I wanted to erase every trace of them being there. When I finished, it was already night. I sat down on the couch, turned on the TV, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at home. I'd gotten my house back, and that was just the beginning. The first few weeks back home were strange. I'd wake up in the morning and, for a few seconds, forget everything that had happened. Then reality would hit. And I'd remember that Kenneth didn't live there anymore, that we were in the middle of a divorce, that my life had been turned upside down. But you know what's interesting? Little by little, I started to realize the house felt lighter. There was no more tension in the air, no more heavy silence, no more bad energy. It was just me, my peace, my routine. Sharon kept working hard on the case. She got access to all of Kenneth's accounts, and what we found was even worse than I'd imagined. Besides the $80,000 in the secret account, he had other hidden investments. Altogether, it was almost $150,000 he'd siphoned off over the years. $150,000 that were mine by right and that he'd hidden, probably planning this betrayal for a long time. Linda, Sharon told me in one of our meetings, this man robbed you systematically. He planned this, and now we're going to make him pay for it. She'd gotten more evidence, too. Old messages between Kenneth and Brittany showed they'd been together for almost a year. A full year of lies, of cheating, while I was there at home, taking care of everything, trusting him. Kenneth tried everything to turn things around. He hired a lawyer, an arrogant man who tried to claim I hadn't contributed financially to the marriage. Sharon shut that down easily. She presented records of all our joint accounts, my years of work, everything I'd done for the household. His lawyer tried to say the secret account was a legitimate savings account. Sharon showed that he'd lied on the asset declaration, deliberately hidden money, and that this was a crime. One day, this was about 3 weeks after I moved back in, Kenneth showed up at the door. I was in the kitchen making lunch when the doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw him standing there alone, looking tired. I thought about not opening the door, but part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. I opened the door, but didn't let him come in. "What do you want, Kenneth?" He sighed and rubbed his face. "Linda, we need to talk. This is getting really ugly, really expensive. Let's resolve this in a civilized way." I crossed my arms. Civilized? Do you think there was anything civilized about the way you treated me? You kicked me out of the house, Kenneth. You brought your mistress to live here. You called me a useless old woman. And now you want civilized? He looked down. I know I messed up. I know I went too far. But Linda, this whole thing, this lawsuit, it's going to destroy both of us. Let's make a deal. I'll give you half of everything. We split it, and each of us goes on with our lives. I laughed without humor. Kenneth, half is already mine by right. You think I'm going to make a deal after you stole from me, lied to me, cheated on me? No. We're going all the way, and you're going to pay for everything you did. He raised his voice. Linda, you're being vindictive. You're doing this out of spite. I looked him straight in the eyes. Steady. No, Kenneth, I'm doing this for justice. And you know I'm right. Now get off my property before I call the police. He left, and when I closed the door, feeling a strength I didn't even know I had. With each passing day, I felt less like the broken woman he'd kicked out of the house and more like the woman I should have always been, strong, determined, the owner of my own destiny. The case went to a hearing 2 months later. I was nervous, I won't lie. The idea of seeing Kenneth again, of having to relive all of that in front of a judge, made me anxious, but Sharon reassured me. Linda, you have the truth completely on your side. You have nothing to fear. The hearing was on a Thursday morning. I got ready, put on a nice but modest outfit, and went to the courthouse. Kenneth was there with his lawyer and Brittany. When I walked into the courtroom, she looked at me with anger, but I didn't even acknowledge her. I sat next to Sharon and waited. The judge came in, a black man in his 60s, with a serious demeanor. He read the case, looked over the documents, and began asking questions. Kenneth's lawyer tried to argue that the secret account was legitimate, that Kenneth had the right to save money, that I didn't have enough proof of adultery. Sharon dismantled every argument. She presented the bank statements, the messages between Kenneth and Brittany, the photos, everything. She showed that Kenneth had lied on the asset disclosure, hidden investments, and planned to abandon me. The judge listened to everything in silence, taking notes. When it was his turn to speak, he looked at Kenneth with clear disapproval. Mr. Kenneth, you lied, cheated, stole, and abandoned your wife of 40 years. Do you believe this is acceptable? Kenneth didn't answer. The judge then looked at me and said, Mrs. Linda, I am very sorry for what you went through, and you can be sure that justice will be done. At the end of that hearing, the judge ruled that 65% of all assets, including the house, would go to me. Kenneth would have to return all the money he'd hidden, pay compensation for emotional damages, and cover the legal costs of the case. When I heard that, my legs went weak, but this time it was from relief. I had won. Justice had been done. 6 months had passed since that hearing. 6 months since the day I saw the look on Kenneth's face when the judge handed down the final ruling. He went pale, I swear he did. Brittany started crying, making a scene in the courtroom, saying it was unfair. But to me, it was the fairest thing that could have happened. The divorce process was finalized 3 months after the hearing. Kenneth tried to appeal, but even his own lawyer said it wouldn't work, that the evidence was far too strong. In the end, he had to accept it. The house stayed with me. 65% of all the assets stayed with me. And he had to pay me $50,000 in compensation for emotional damages. When the money hit my account, I sat on the bed and cried. But it wasn't sadness. It was a mix of relief, justice served, and knowing that I had fought and won. I heard through an acquaintance that Kenneth and Brittany split up about 2 months after the ruling. It seems that when he lost the money, when she realized she wouldn't have the luxury life she'd imagined, she simply left, disappeared, and he ended up alone in a small rented apartment, working again because the money he had left wasn't enough to support the life he used to have. I won't lie and say I didn't feel a certain satisfaction when I found out. I did, because he had made me believe I was worthless, that I was a disposable old woman, that he'd found someone better, and in the end, he lost everything. The house, the money, the mistress, his dignity. I, on the other hand, began to rebuild my life. At first it was hard. I still woke up in the middle of the night with that tight feeling in my chest, remembering everything that had happened. I still had days when I looked in the mirror and saw an old, tired woman. But little by little, I started rediscovering myself. I began doing things I hadn't done in years. I went back to painting, a hobby I'd abandoned when I got married. I started attending a women's group at church where we met every week to talk, have coffee, and support each other. And it was there, in that group, that I realized something. I wasn't the only one. There were other women there who had gone through similar things: betrayal, abandonment, disrespect, and all of them had survived. All of them were starting over. One of the women in the group, Gloria, was 71 and had divorced 3 years earlier after discovering her husband had a second family. Another, Patricia, was 64 and had been abandoned by her husband, who decided to live life with a younger woman. Hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't alone in that pain. And more than that, it made me realize we were strong. All of us. We had survived, we had fought, and we were there, standing, rebuilding. I also started going out again. I accepted an invitation from an old friend to go to the movies, something I hadn't done in years. I started traveling a bit, visited a cousin who lives in another state and whom I hadn't seen in a long time. And everywhere I went, with every new thing I did, I felt like I was finding myself again. I wasn't just Kenneth's ex-wife. I was Linda, a 67-year-old woman, yes, but a strong, intelligent, capable woman. One day, this was about a month ago, I was at the grocery store doing my shopping when I ran into Kenneth. We almost bumped into each other in the cereal aisle. He looked tired, aged, and when he saw me, he seemed embarrassed. "Hi, Linda," he said softly. I took a deep breath. For months I'd imagined that moment, what I'd say if I ever ran into him. But when it actually happened, I realized I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I felt nothing. "Hi, Kenneth," I replied, polite but distant. We stood there for a few seconds in silence until he said, "Linda, I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you. I was an idiot." I looked at him, at the man who had been my husband for 40 years, and felt a certain sadness, not for him, but for the whole situation. For the wasted time, for the years we spent together that ended in such an ugly way. "Kenneth," I said calmly, "I accept your apology, but know that what you did changed my life forever. You made me question my worth, my beauty, my usefulness. You made me feel like I was nothing, and it took me a long time to realize that the problem was never me, it was you." He looked down, not knowing what to say. I continued, "But in a strange way, I'm grateful. Because it was through all of this that I discovered who I really am, and I'm much stronger than I ever imagined." I didn't wait for an answer. I just grabbed my cart and walked on. And as I moved through the grocery store aisles, picking out fruit, grabbing bread, doing ordinary everyday things, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I had moved on, I had survived, and I was okay. Today, 6 months after everything, I can say that I'm happy. It's not the happiness I imagined for my 67 years, no. I'm not traveling the world with a loving husband by my side. I don't have the perfect family I dreamed of, but I have peace. I have my home, my space, my freedom. I have friends who support me, hobbies that make me happy, and an inner strength I discovered when everything seemed lost. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that you're never too old to start over. It's never too late to fight for your rights, to seek justice, to stand back up. I'm 67 years old, yes, but I still have a lot of life ahead of me, and this time I'm going to live it my way, without depending on anyone, without accepting scraps, without letting myself be diminished. Kenneth thought he'd destroyed me when he kicked me out of the house. He thought I was a useless, disposable old woman, but he had no idea what I was capable of. And when he found out, when he saw that I had prepared myself, that I had fought and won, it was already too late. My name is Linda. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how I proved that you should never, never, ever underestimate a woman.